In this video, we'll take a look at the different curve types, key curve types that are available to us in Lightwave, and the differences between them and how we use them. First of all, you can see that once again here I have another one of my shockingly exciting pieces of animation just on a single camera there. Whilst over here in the graph editor, we can see the only two channels that are in operation. Obviously, it doesn't matter which channels we're talking about. Curves are curves after all. And what we can see is that initially here I have them set to the first, or perhaps the last, but certainly the most simple curve type, which is stepped. When using stepped keys, positions just hold themselves completely flat until you reach a new keyframe, at which point the motion curve steps to that new keyframe value. And so you get an instant switch of position like this. It occurs over 0 time, there's no kind of in-betweening to it, not even on fractional frames. It's truly instant. This, of course, is the curve type that we generally use when we're making pose-to-pose animation. You would generally use your graph editor options to, of course, set your default to stepped, and you would start posing your character or whatever else. The result being this stepped pose-to-pose type motion. Next then, we have linear curves, or linear keys. In this case, interpolation between different key points will always be a perfectly straight line. So here at frame 0, the Y value is 0 meters. Here at frame 25, it's at, well, let's just say that it was at 1.5 exactly, or let's make it 1.5 exactly. Then of course at the halfway point between frame 0 and 25, the interpolation would have pushed it to 3/4 of a meter, 0.75. Linear keys are nice, simple, straightforward. You get equal spacing at all points, of course, between the two keyframes on any side at any motion. Your little spacing interpolated keys always have the same distance. And running things in linear can actually be a good way to assess the timing of your animation. We've talked about the differences between timing and spacing. Linear keys gives you constant spacing between any two pairs of keyframes. Thus, it can be a good way to work on timing. Next, we actually get into the curve or spline types. The most common is the TCB spline here. TCB spline will create smooth interpolation between different points, giving you this spline style action. Of course, we can see the result in the motion path here, and of course the resultant motion of the camera. TCB splines have these three controls, tension, continuity and bias, which dictate the properties of the spline and how it interpolates between or across even the key values. Tension, by far the most commonly used. You can think of this as how tightly the spline is getting pulled at a particular key point. So for instance, if we see the Z channel here, which is just a constant rate of motion throughout. If I take this central key there and I set its tension to 1, you can see, of course, that the spline tightens out and becomes flat at that point there. Notice what this has done to my motion path. It appears to have gone back to this triangle that we saw in linear keyframes. Seems strange when, of course, our Y axis here is this nice smooth curve, this nice smooth hill. Again, this is one of those little idiosyncrasies about reading graphs. What we're actually seeing, of course, is the fact that the smoothness running in on the y-axis here is being counteracted exactly by the smoothness to flatten here on the Z. As such, when we play it back, we see that what we're getting is this nice smooth over-the-top action in the upward motion of the camera. We're getting this ease in, ease out of its high position, but we're sort of getting this stop in the middle as it comes to a slowdown. So again, it's easing in and easing out to its Z position at that central point. The two ease ins and ease outs are cancelling one another, and this makes the overall path become this cornered triangle like that. But of course, as you can see, because of the ease in, ease out on both channels that you're getting, the smoothness on both channels, the overall motion of the camera itself as it traverses around is still quite smooth. You're not getting this hard corner in the motion, just in the motion path. So how's about the other controls then? Continuity, well, if we select this key here, which is the high one in our Y channel there, and we tweak the continuity, what you can see this does is that it changes how continuous is the spline's smoothness across that point. So with a positive value, it sort of double banks over on either side of the key, and with a negative, and in fact full -1, it has no continuity across the key whatsoever, and so of course it just becomes very similar to a linear keyframe. The spline is directed at this point right back at the previous key. If we look at it again at 0, 0, 0, then we see of course that we've got the nice smooth hump of the hill here, and it's equally spaced on either side of this mid keyframe on the y-axis. What the bias will do is swing that one way or the other. It will bias it to one side of the keyframe or the other, like this. This of course allows you to create little bits of overshoot or follow through, or anticipation if you bias it on the other side like that. So in this case I've now managed to get the camera to actually move higher than its existing keyframe there like this. But of course the overall motion is still nice and smooth and clean. Most commonly you use TCB curves just for smoothing over areas, and what you'll see is if I grab the first and last keyframes of the whole action and set their tension to 1, then we get this nice ease out and ease in action taking place at either end of the motion. And so we get this slow out and slow in type of motion occurring there. Another interesting way that you can sort of manipulate a TCB and make use of a TCB is when you have a situation such as we see here in the Z position, where I have two keys spaced apart, one higher, one lower, and an in-between between them. If I'm wanting to slow out or slow in to either of these frames, this in-between frame here, I can actually give negative tension, and what you see that does is to accentuate the smoothness of the ease in and ease out like that. Once again, if I push it to tension 1, then it does it the other way, so I get the slow out to a slow in to another slow out and back to a slow in there. I get this sort of plateau tightened out. But if I push it the opposite way, then I can accentuate that overall smoothness of the ease in and ease out between these two keys here. If this key did not exist, then you can see the level of slow in and slow out that I get just with two keys. And that's as good as I can get with a TCB spline across two keys with both set to tension 1. However, by creating an in-between key between two TCB in and out points like this, I can easily create more flow into my ease in and ease out maneuver. We also have this, the Hermite spline. Hermite spline is a very simple little handled spline like this, and so you can control how the spline is swung simply by grabbing and manipulating the handles here. Again, as you can see there, swinging it around for bias, but I'm able to go much more extreme on this type of curve and create these really hard pulls like that. What you can also do with these spline handles, as you see, they move together. You can move them individually by holding down the Alt key, and then clicking on a single handle allows you to move that key, or rather that spline handle on that side of the key, independently, creating these more complex shapes like this. If we switch to the last major curve type then, the Bezier spline, what we see is that the Bezier very much mimics the same kind of behaviour that we saw on the Hermite spline, except rather than just being able to weight it like this, you can project it out to a given distance as well. This gives you maximum control over the interpolation that is taking place across keys. And once again, you can break handles by holding down Alt to create these very specific shapes in your curves between your different key values like this. Of course, imagine trying to create a shape like this using just TCB splines. You would need a good few more in-betweens along the way to do it. You would need additional keyframes in there. By using the splines, by using Bezier or Hermite, it enables you to get additional detail in your curve, additional detail in your motion, but without having to lay down extra keyframes. This can help you keep the total number of keyframes that you're having to manage and of course, shift around or retime to a minimum, while still giving you excellent control over the interpolation and therefore the spacing that is taking place between keyframes. Doing all of this is of course, a delicate skill in itself, getting used to the different types of curve. Obviously, if you wind up going round shifting timings for things, then you might find that if you've got Bezier or whatnot, you need to come and consequently adjust those in order to fit with the new timing that you have created. And so from a workflow perspective, it's really a toss-up between additional time creating and manipulating keyframes or additional time spent manipulating curve handles or curve properties in the case of something like the TCB spline. So there you go. These are the various curve types that are available to us in Lightwave and how you can go about using them to manipulate the way that keyframes are interpolated and thus get control of the spacing in your motion between those keys.